Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a carrot ginger butternut squash soup with some coconut milk and some cherry chocolate chip walnut scones, and we'll make some kind of Italian melts to go with our soup. So let's start out with our base for our scones. We need to have a nice kind of flour base for it. We're going to cut our butter into it. So we're going to start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So 1 and 2. And then we're going to use a half a teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So let's get our salt. We've got our half a teaspoon of salt and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1, 2. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of granulated sugar. There we go. And then I'm just going to use my pastry cutter here to give it all a quick kind of toss. Make sure that baking powder and the salt and the sugar all get mixed into the flour, almost as if you sifted it, but just a quick toss around. And then I'm going to take 1 stick of cold butter, so a half a cup of cold butter, and I'm going to first kind of cut it into down the middle into fourths, and then we're going to cube it up, and then I'll cut it into my my flour mixture here. And this is to give us those wonderful flaky layers. You want to make sure you use nice and cold butter so that it doesn't, cream into the flour. You want it to kind of get cut into it to make this nice kind of like buttery flakes. So I always start by just cutting it up into chunks because it just works a little bit easier. I don't have to do as much work with my pastry cutter. But again, you want to use nice and cold butter. I always just take it right out before we start because you don't want it to be room temperature, because that's not going to allow you to get it nice and flaky. And then I'm just going to kind of coat each piece of butter real quick with a little bit of flour. That just kind of helps some of the sticking. And then I'm going to use my pastry cutter here, which is essentially like 5 blades. And I'm going to push down on that butter, and we're going to cut that butter into the flour until we have no pieces bigger than a pea. So we'll do it for like 30 seconds, and then I'll use my butter knife to kind of clean out my blades, and then we'll cut some more. And this is going to give you those flaky layers, just like with a biscuit or a shortbread. It's just going to make it wonderful. Even like same thing with like a flaky pie crust. Okay, let me clean out my butter between my blades. Now, you can always, if you don't have a pastry cutter, you can always do this in a food processor, or you can do it the good old-fashioned way with just 2 butter knives, or by pinching it between your fingers. I find just using the pastry cutter like this works really well because it doesn't take a whole lot of time to cut it into it. So by the time you haul out your food processor and then you got to clean it, it's more work. Okay, we almost have these all cut up. There we go. I'm just going to clear out my blades one more time because it just likes to get kind of compact in there. And then we'll just cut a few more times, and then we'll be ready to make our wet mixture. And then we'll mix them together. We'll add in our walnuts, our chocolate chips, and our dried cherries. I feel like it's just a good combination together. That's one of my favorite sourdough bread combinations. As an inclusion, I love the walnut cherry chocolate chip sourdough bread. Okay. Clear these guys out. So we've got our nice kind of dry mixture where we cut out our butter into the flour. Now we're going to make our wet mixture, which is going to use a half a cup of sourdough discard. And give it a quick stir. And which is perfect because I need to use some because we are going to feed these up so I can make some more sourdough because I baked up all of mine that I had proofing in the fridge. And we almost finished up our strawberry swirl loaf last night, and we're going to finish off our plain one today making our sandwiches. Okay, so a half a cup of sourdough discard. And then we're going to add in 1 egg, which where did he go? I had an egg around here. And he must have rolled. Maybe I didn't have an egg. It's right over here. It's with the I knew I put out an egg, just in the wrong part. Okay, we're going to crack in 1 egg. And then we're going to do 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract.
So you have 2 questions. First, do you have a sourdough recipe, and what's your favorite?
Yes, I do have a sourdough recipe. I have my traditional loaf, and then I have the big loaf, which I have made recipe cards for everybody to have on that one, as well as videos on how you can make your very first one. Because if you've never made it before, it kind of takes, a hot minute to learn how to do it, as well as videos and recipe cards on how you can make your own starter. So I do have that available for everybody because I will say I had so much fun with my sourdough journey that it was just too good not to share. We're going to add in 2 tablespoons of cream. We will use a little bit more cream to brush on top of our scones, but for right now, we'll just mix that in. But I do have those 2 sourdough recipe cards for everybody available on there. You'll just have to check it out on the link on our page for it.
And what's your favorite?
Oh, my favorite sourdough. Oh, my favorite? For a sweet one, I have to say it's the cherry chocolate walnut. I love that one for a sweet, but for a savory one, my favorite, and it's really simple, it's just Gouda, black pepper, and fresh oregano. It is just one of my favorites. It's just a very simple inclusion on there. But I love the black pepper in it. I also love anything with rosemary. Those are just I just love those flavors. Okay, we've got our wet base mixed up. We're going to pour this into our dry base, and then we're going to just kind of toss it together until we have a dry shag form. And then what we'll do is we'll put our walnuts, our chocolate chips, and our dried cherries in it. And then we'll do our press and folds. Okay, so we're just going to use our fork here, and we're going to just toss it until we have, again, a nice dry shag. It's not going to be super wet because we'll press and fold it. You don't want to have a very wet base because then you'll get you won't get the right texture on your scone. Okay, here's our nice kind of dry shag. Now we're going to add in our chocolate chips and our walnuts and our cherries before we do our press and folds. So for our chocolate chips, we're going to do about, since we have a lot of kind of going into this, we're going to do about a half a cup because we don't want to do kind of too much. Let me grab that guy. So a half a cup of chocolate chips, mini chocolate chips or chocolate chunks all work really well for this as well. We're going to do about a half a cup of walnuts, and you want chopped up walnuts. There we go. And then I've got some dried cherries. I think I'm going to have to wash my hands real quick to open these up. And let me grab some scissors. And then dried cherries. Now, you can use fresh cherries in this. The only thing is fresh cherries will give you kind of soggy spots in your sourdough bread. So I like the dried cherries better. Okay. And because these cherries are a little bit big, I'm just going to snip a couple of them so they're not as big. So you don't just have a super huge cherry chunk in it. Now, the dried cherries just, I feel like they play so well with this. And you're going to want about a 1/3 cup or so of the dried cherries because they give you a lot of flavor. I'm just going to cut the really big ones in there so we kind of get those flavors throughout. Let's grab a few more. And then what we're going to do is we'll give this a quick toss, and then it'll be time to do our press and folds, which is where you get the lovely flaky layers in our scones. Because these aren't like a drop scone. You've got to press and fold to make it. Okay.
You had a question? How was the steak dinner last night?
Oh, it was excellent. Delicious. Torn loved the twice baked potatoes. He was like, "Oh, you should make these every single time." And I was like, "Oh, you wish there's just so much more work than a regular baked potato." There was nothing left of anything, so it was a hit. Everyone was really happy. They'd been asking for steak for a while, so I was like, finally gave in and gave them their steak. My kids think that they can have steak dinner every single day, and I was just like, who won the lottery? Okay, so here again, we have our little bit of our dry shag. I'm just going to kind of toss it a little bit to get some of those drier bits to the part. And then we're going to do our press and folds. So press down, and then you're going to kind of just fold these crumbs back up and over. Now, again, this isn't a super wet mixture, but you're going to press and fold it until it forms into a kind of a cohesive dough base. Don't knead it, press and fold, because every time you fold this mixture in and press it down, you're creating a wonderful flaky layer. Here we go. And then once we've got it to look kind of like, you know, stuck together, then we'll shape it into 2 pucks so that we can make our nice mini scones. But you see, as you push it together, that butter in there kind of holds everything together on it. But you don't want to don't feel like, oh, it needs more liquid. It doesn't. You see how it just comes together so nicely? So just press it down. Do not knead. Kneading will give you a really stiff, kind of rock hard scone. There we go. And then I always like to take the little dry bits that always kind of pop out and press them between layers. Just helps them kind of incorporate into it. Okay, now that we have a pretty good base here, I'm going to divide this into as much as possible 2 equal portions, and then we'll shape them into a puck so that we can cut them. Let's see. I think we'll put a little bit of this over here. So I kind of just push it down until we've got a nice little circle formed. And any chocolate chips or walnuts or cherries that pop out, just push back in. So just kind of push down and shape for it. So we've got 1 puck shaped. Push these chocolate chips and walnuts in. And now we're going to do our next one. So I'm going to just slide this over here just a little bit. I'm going to do a couple press and folds on this one because there's a little bit of dry bits that I want to add in here first. Here we go. Make sure all of that goodness gets incorporated. Okay, now I can start kind of pressing it into a little puck. And then what we're going to do is I will place this on parchment paper, and then we're going to cut it each puck into 8 segments so that we have just these perfect kind of mini scones. Now you can always make 1 giant puck and then cut it into 8. But I find that the mini ones work a little bit better. Okay, we've got these all pushed out and ready. Let me grab my baking sheet. I'll rest it right there. I have parchment paper down. That's just going to allow it to come up nice and easy after you bake it. We're going to move both pucks onto our baking sheet, and then we're going to cut it down. Now you might run into like a walnut or a chocolate chip. Just push firmly down. Here we go. And then we'll slide and add this little cherry back in there. Any little bits that pop out, just push back into it. There we go. And then slide them out so that there's just a little bit of room between each ones, because these will grow in size. And this allows the edges to kind of get nice and crisped up as well. So I'll start cutting this into quadrants. And I'm using a pastry cutter, but you can also use a butter knife. Works well for this as well. We'll slide these guys out. Give these a little bit more room. They're getting kind of close. Here we go. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna brush the tops of these with about a tablespoon of cream and sprinkle with sugar. Now let me wash my hands real quick. Now I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. So we will bake these at 400 degrees for 18 minutes.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? Tonight, I actually have a plan because got a little bit of a crazy sports night. Both girls have soccer. My son has basketball. So we are going to do, now this sounds crazy, but my kids got ramen noodles for Halloween. Like they trick-or-treated and they got ramen noodles from my house. So I've got a bunch of those like cheap ramen. So we're going to take the noodles out and I'm going to do a lo mein, like a veggie lo mein. And then my kids really love scallops. So I have some jumbo scallops that I got from Aldi's this week, and we're going to sear those off, and then I'll make a lovely yum yum sauce to go with it as well. So that's pretty much my plan for tonight to go. So, because that's one of those, I feel like Asian cooking, when I do it, I can typically make those meals in, you know, around 30 minutes, which is going to be perfect for our busy schedule. But we're going to take our cream here and we're just going to do, again, a little dabble on the top of each one. This is going to give the scone a nice kind of lovely brownish color on it, like make it more golden. And then I sprinkle a little bit of sugar. Now you can use like casting sugar if you want, you know, those bigger chunked ones, but regular sugar I find works perfectly. You're just going to give it a little bit of a pinch and sprinkle it over the top of each one of these scones. This is just going to give you just a nice kind of sweetened crust on the very top of our scone, which I think is perfect because scones are not overly sweet. They're sweeter than a biscuit, but not as sweet as a cookie. So this little bit of extra sugar on the top, and it's hardly any, but it just gives you a wonderful little pop. Let's go pop this in the oven. Again, we're going to bake these at 400 degrees for 18 minutes, which then they'll be kind of perfect and beautiful. They are not, the one thing I hate with scones are scones that are rock hard or dry out. These stay moist in the middle, but still give you those flaky layers and are just wonderful. So I'm going to set my timer for 18 minutes. And we'll let those bake up. And while we're baking those up, we're going to work on our soup and we'll prep our sandwiches. And then I am going to melt a little bit of chocolate to drizzle over the top of each scone, just again to add a little something extra. Okay, so we're going to do our carrot butternut squash ginger soup. So I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of olive oil in my Dutch oven here. I'm going to have it start warming up, and I'm going to dice up my carrot here, or my onion, and get that sauteing off while I prep our carrots and our butternut squash, so that we can kind of start sauteing them up, and then we'll simmer them for a little bit, and then we're going to puree it with some coconut milk for just a really delicious soup.
Good question. Do you have the recipe posted for the scones?
For the scones, I do not have this recipe posted on there, but I might make it a recipe card for my members this week, since it is kind of a good fall winter recipe. So I might have that out there, but we do post our videos, our lives, on the link on our page, so you can always rewatch and cook along with me again. I always make sure that everybody can cook my recipes from the video, so I make sure that I go through every step and every ingredient and how long they cook and the temperatures and whatnot. We're going to add in our onions here with about our tablespoon of olive oil, and we're going to let that saute up, and then we'll start cutting up our butternut squash and our carrots.
A twofold question. Are you hosting for Thanksgiving, and what dishes are you excited about?
So my mom hosts, and they live like right down the road from us, but I do the cooking. With some help from my siblings and whatnot. But we kind of have, it's a large group. So like, because I have a lot of siblings, and my siblings have a lot of kids like me. And we have about 40 plus people come. So what we do is we get 3 deep fried turkeys delivered, and then we cook 2 turkeys. So one goes on the smoker, like I'll do it in the green egg, and then we do one in the oven. Then I make my green bean casserole, and this is not your traditional Southern green bean casserole. I use fresh green beans. I fry up my own onion strings, make my own cream of mushroom soup for the base of it. So it tastes nothing like the traditional one, but it's delicious. Then we do mashed potatoes and gravy, stuffing, and then of course dressing for the side of it that can't fit into the turkey. And then we have a sweet potatoes and parsnip mash, cranberry sauce, and then we have, and this has been on our Thanksgiving table since I was a little girl, got Jolly Green Giant peas and corn. It's just something we have there, and it's crazy, but we always have it on there.
And don't forget your Thanksgiving morning cinnamon roll.
Yes, so every Thanksgiving, half of my family, the crazy half, go run this 5-mile run. I used to do it. I did it for several years, and then I was like 9 months pregnant, and that was like the year I got out of it, and I was like, yes, never doing it again. But they all run it, and while they run, I make everybody cinnamon rolls and like nice and bacon and a big breakfast for them. So when they come back, they all have this nice breakfast. So I do make a huge batch of homemade cinnamon rolls for everybody. So I do that in the morning, and that's kind of to hold everybody over until dinner time. We do not eat Thanksgiving dinner early. Like most people, it's typically at a regular dinner time, which is an early dinner for us, but it's like at like 6 o'clock when most people, I feel like they eat Thanksgiving dinner at like 2 or 3. We do ours later. It's an actual dinner, mainly because it takes that long to cook everything up and for that many people. And then I'm going to make a couple sourdough loaves or sourdough rolls this year. But we have one thing that's always on there, which the kids love. And this was a staple that we had growing up, were crescent rolls. You know, the ones where you pop and you roll them up. Got to have those. You know, some things you just can't change, you know. So not super bougie, because we always just keep the same thing, the exact same meal every single year. But it's delicious. Okay, I've got my butternut squash here. I kind of de-seeded it, and we're going to kind of cube it up and let it start to saute, and then we'll get our carrots going as well. Now, you can always buy pre-cut, diced up butternut squash, but It's actually a really inexpensive one, and it's not too difficult to cut. I find the best way to peel it is using your, big chef knife versus trying to get out a potato peeler and to peel it up. Let me give this a quick stir. And then we're going to dice these guys up. And before we toss them in there, I'm going to add in some garlic into the onions, give it a quick saute. And then we're going to also throw in our carrots. And once they're nice and tender, then we will puree everything in our blender, because this is going to be like a bisque type base to our soup, which is my favorite way to have butternut squash in a soup. I'm cutting my little cubes smaller so they get tender faster. Now this is like a sauteed where I do the butternut squash. Last man down. But you can definitely roast it if you want to. It gives a slightly different flavor, but still lovely. There we go. Now, butternut squash is not as thick and dense as if you use like a sweet potato or a buttercup squash or pumpkin. So you don't need quite as much liquid in it. It has more of a velvety texture. If you were to sub out with a sweet potato or, pumpkin or a buttercup squash, you're going to have to add a little bit more liquid because they're a bit more fibrous, which means they just take in a lot more before they thin out into that nice kind of bisque texture. Okay. Let's get these guys in here, but let's get our garlic in first. Let me rinse the spoon real quick. And I'm going to put a good, 2 teaspoons of garlic in there. We're going to let it saute for just about 30 seconds to a minute so that it can really let out its flavors and get crisped up. There we go. And then we'll start adding in our butternut squash. And then we'll peel up our carrots and we'll get our carrots in there, and we're going to get some ginger paste in here as well. There we go. And this is just a small batch of it. I find that a butternut squash is very big, and you can actually use it to make 2 or 3 soups, smaller version soups of it. And I like to do like different flavors. Sometimes I do a curried butternut squash or a sage one. This one I want kind of carrot and ginger to shine with it, which I feel like are really lovely, as well as that garlic. Okay, I've got my carrot here. We're going to peel this guy up, get off that kind of earthy outer skin. And then we're going to dice these up small as well so that they will cook up fast and get tender. And this is, I find carrot has a pretty strong flavor, so you don't need a lot to get you that nice carrot flavor. The butternut squash is going to give you that nicer texture to it than if you were to use all carrot. So I always like to, because it just makes it smoother. So I never try to do an all carrot soup. Sometimes I'll sub in sweet potatoes or a different squash. I'll get our tips off. And what I'm going to do, just dice them up nice and small. Carrots are a little bit more hardy than butternut squash, which means making them smaller will allow them to get tender faster. The sauteing also helps kind of make you like saute up faster, like tenderize them instead of just boiling them in a broth. Let's give our base here a little stir. There we go. And then once we've got these sauteing up, we'll add in our ginger paste, some onion powder, paprika, garlic salt, and then we'll add in some vegetable broth. We're going to do water with vegetable bouillon in it. And then, of course, after that's kind of heated, we'll add in some coconut milk as well. There we go. So almost got these guys all diced up. So 3 good sized carrots. It's going to give you about a cup of diced carrots. There we go. So our kind of, it's like a 2 to 3 ratio. I've got about 2 cups of butternut squash with a cup of carrots, and then you've got your diced onions. There we go. We'll pat that down, and then we're going to add our spices in here. So I've got ginger paste, paprika, and some onion powder, and then we'll do some garlic salt. I'm going to use a good amount of ginger paste because I want that flavor to really pop through. So I'm going to do probably like close to a tablespoon. If you want to use fresh ginger root, make sure you taste your ginger root first. Sometimes you get a really spicy one. Sometimes it's more mild, and kind of add to what you're going to use there. If you're going to be using dried ginger, use about a teaspoon because, again, that's a bit stronger in flavor. We're going to do about a teaspoon and a half of paprika. This is going to give a really lovely kind of color, like an orangish red color to it, even though you've got the orange from the squashes, but it kind of just gives you a more earthy flavor. And then we're going to add in some onion powder, about a teaspoon and a half. And then a little bit of garlic salt. A good shake over, about a teaspoon, because we are going to be using bouillon, which is going to have a little bit more of a salty flavor to it. There we go. Stir these guys up. And I just like to let those spices hit together for just a little bit.
Question. Do you do Elf on the Shelf?
Yes, we do. My 10-year-old has been trying to get the Elf on the Shelf to come early. She wants to write it a letter like she did last year, and I'm like, I don't know if I can commit to an extra 2 weeks of it. But yes, we do Elf on the Shelf. We're a little crazy, so each one of my kids has an elf on the shelf. So, every time, like when Teddy was born, we got a little baby elf. And then when Jack was born, Teddy's elf grew up into a big boy. And so now we have like 4, like 2 girls, 2 boys, and then this little baby elf that we hide. And they do some crazy stuff. And then sometimes I get really big plans, and then I'm like, whew, zonked out. I will say my older 2, because they're not believers, they're 15 and 13. They have actually started helping me with doing some crazy like hiding and like scenes for them, which has been a real help, I will say. It's one of those things where I have this like, oh, this is going to be so nice. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Okay. Now that our spices have heated up just a little bit, we're going to add in, I've got about 2.5 cups of water here. We're going to add in about 1 first. And then I'm just going to mix around, kind of scrape the bottom of our pan to bring up any of those spices. There we go. And then we'll add a little bit more. Again, kind of scraping around. And then I kind of add just enough water. So I'm going to actually end up just using 2 cups to cover my my veggies and let them simmer in it, because we're also going to be adding in a can of coconut milk. And so you don't want to add in too much liquid now, because then your soup is going to get too runny. And I'm going to turn that up, and we're going to let that simmer. And I'm going to put in about a heaping spoonful of vegetable bouillon here. And I have apparently 2 jars in my fridge. So I was hoping to use up one of them, and it looks like I'll be able to use up this one. So a big kind of heaping spoonful. You wanted enough flavor to flavor the coconut milk as well. So I'm going to use up all of this one, which I can then just scrape out, and I'll have a little bit. I find whenever I like kind of do a full clean out of my fridge, I find like 5 of these things in there, all different flavors. I'm a big fan of using like bouillon over like the broth bases, because it adds just more flavors. But this is all done now. So give this a nice kind of stir up here. Here we go. And we'll let it come to a simmer, then we'll add our coconut milk in. But I want to just make sure I have enough spice in there right now. Perfect. You want it a bit stronger than your final product because we'll add the coconut milk in, but when you puree those vegetables, you're dulling out the flavor. So it needs to be more intense so that when you get to it, you'll be on the right kind of setting. Okay, let's work on our sandwich. And then we've got to melt some chocolate to drizzle over our scones, but we won't do that until we have the scones out because I don't want that to firm up.
Do you guys make a turkey stock for Thanksgiving?
So yes, it's actually really funny. My brother-in-law, who's like this amazing, fantastic cook, he takes all of the turkey carcasses from all 5 turkeys, and we have this huge stock pot that he puts it in, and then he reduces it down to make this lovely kind of base to it. So it's more reduced than a stock on there. And then he always does the next day. He makes chicken a la king for everybody, or turkey a la king. I always want to say chicken, but turkey a la king. And then I always get like a big whole jar of this like reduced down stock left over that I use for a lot of cooking in there. I will say my love for cooking and like going crazy, doing more like experimental stuff came from my brother-in-law. He was kind of the first person in our family, like my sister's, like a decade or so older than me. So he, became part of my life when I was like 8 or 9 years old. So he's like practically a brother. And he's the one who really started on like introduced us to Williams and Sonoma and just kind of that fun, cool cooking, experimenting, trying out. He introduced me to Fine Cooking Magazine and Gourmet Magazine when I was a kid. So he does like a lot of really cool cooking and inspiration from him. Okay, let's get my sourdough. Here we go. Oh, I got them at least cut. We're going to go grab our scones out of the oven, and then we can work on our sandwich here. I'm going to actually just turn this on real quick to start heating up. That way it won't take as long. So our scones have been baking at 400 for 18 minutes. Look at those gorgeous scones. They look beautiful. Nice. That cream on the top gives you that nice little golden brown edging around the side. Otherwise, because it just uses granulated sugar, it's more blonde, but beautiful. Theirs are going to be fantastic. Here we go. So we've got our cherry walnut chocolate chip scones here with our sourdough discard. I'm going to melt a little bit of chocolate to drizzle over the top of some of them to give that little extra chocolate punch to it in just a second. But pretty excited for it. I'm going to have to make my cherry chocolate walnut sourdough bread soon because that is one of my favorite sourdoughs. And when I used to, long ago, when I used to work, there was this cafe that was a French cafe near where I worked. And they imported all of their ingredients from France and whatnot. And they had the best breads. And they would make this cherry chocolate walnut sourdough bread every winter. And I would get it every single day because they would sell you a slice of bread for $1. It was such a steal. Then, of course, they closed down. It made me so sad. But they had just had the best sourdough. And now I always make it every year at wintertime because I just got to have my little slice of it because I love it so much. Okay, we've got our sourdough here. We put on butter on one side of each one. That's going to be on the kind of the skillet. I have my skillet warming up so it can start this kind of process here. Since we're using pepperoni and salami, I want to use more of a mild cheese. So we're going to use some havarti, which is a semi-soft but very mild cheese. Doesn't have a strong flavor to it so much, but gives you that nice cheese pull. Mozzarella is also fantastic for this, or Gouda, but I would skip like the cheddar cheeses. They just don't pair well with salami and pepperoni as much. So I'm going to doing on one, I'm going to do just salami because I'm not a big fan of pepperoni. We're going to do our nice kind of layer here, and then we're going to add some red onions as well because they all just kind of play together nicely. Here we go. So we've got our salami on there. I'm going to give this a quick stir. And we're going to add in our coconut milk now because I want those to kind of infuse together. Now, if you were using cream or instead of coconut milk, I wouldn't add it in until right before blending because cream sometimes can curdle when you cook it at a higher heat for it. So I'll get this. And I'm using a can of coconut milk. This is not sweetened one, but it is nice and creamy and will give you just a really lovely coconut flavor to this. That is just going to be fantastic. I'm going to mix this up, give it a good stir. Here we go. And we're just going to, again, continue to let that simmer for a little bit until we're ready to blend it up. Okay. We're going to do our top layer on that, but I want to get my bottom layer going on this one so it can start to kind of melt. Sourdough is a little bit of a thicker bread, denser, so it takes a little bit longer to melt the cheese in it, but I think sourdoughs make the best grilled cheeses, especially homemade sourdough. And this is we're using a traditional loaf, my basic recipe, which I do have that recipe card for everyone for both a smaller loaf and a big loaf. It is, I will say this, I feel like this recipe, it took me a while to find one that worked really well for me. And this recipe has been foolproof every single time. I very rarely will have a bad one turn out. The only time I actually had a bad one turn out was I put my sourdough to proof in my fridge outside. And this was back in this like winter last year. And it was so cold outside that it caused the stuff in my fridge to freeze. And so it partially froze, which then it didn't do the right pop on it. So temperature is very important to proofing. Let's add our little bit of our red onions here. So just going to take some onions, little bits of it. This will just, I think, add a nice base of flavor that is just going to fit really well with the sandwich. I'm going to just cut them nice and thin. Red onions are really great on sandwiches. I don't substitute it out for a different onion because red onions are more mild, which works really well for it. Let's get these guys. And then we're going to put our last little bit of cheese on here. And we'll do our second layer of havarti. And I just make sure my havarti cheese or whatever cheese I'm using doesn't overflow where the bread is because I don't want it to melt over the side and then burn onto the sides of my my sandwich here. Turn that down just a smidge. And then for mine, I'm going to add a little bit of sun-dried tomato pesto on the underneath of it because I think it's going to pair really well with the salami and havarti. So just a nice kind of little pop on here. Don't go too crazy with it because, you know, pesto has a little bit of an oil base, and if you put too much, it will kind of make your bread soggy. Okay, now that we've had it toasting up, let me just check to see. Good, we've got a good butter melt on there. I'm going to turn my back burner on. This is my back one. And I'm going to do is my makeshift kind of double boiler for our chocolate that we're going to drizzle over our scones. So I've got just a small amount of chocolate chips in here. I don't need a whole lot, just enough for them to melt, and then I can just drizzle them with a thing. But I have in my pan here about 1 inch of water for it, because again, you don't need a whole lot. Okay, let's check on our soup here. I'm going to grab a fork and see if I can press my fork through the veggies. That is when I know that they'll be nice and tender. And then it'll be time to puree. So we've got it pretty good there. Our butternut squash, as you can see, is pretty perfect. And our carrots are pretty good. Carrots, again, take a little bit longer to puree or to get soft than our butternut squash. Turn that up just a smidge, and then we can start transferring it to puree. But I want to taste it one more time now that I've added in that coconut milk, because again, that coconut milk will dull out some of that flavor. I don't think I need to add any more. And again, the flavors that we used in here are just really simple. It's just garlic, ginger, paprika, and then vegetable bouillon. I'm gonna slide these guys over here, so I have a little bit of work room for this. I'm gonna bring my Vitamix over because the Vitamix is really great for pureeing like soups. We're gonna get a ladle, but I'm gonna do my first flip on my grilled cheeses. Now this first flip is really just to start toasting it up on there, get that process going. So, and this side looks pretty good, but we'll double flip that one. I always like to take a little bit of time when I'm like grilling them up so that that cheese will melt on there. I'm going to turn it down to about a 4. And then I'm going to grab my ladle here, and we're going to start ladling our soup into our blender so we can puree it up. You could also use an immersion blender, but I find it's just easier with a big blender. It gives you, I will say, immersions are great. It's less mess, but a typical blender gives you a smoother blend. Immersions can leave it a little bit chunky. And if you do buy an immersion blender, I do recommend you get a corded one versus the battery powered one, because I have gone through 2 battery powered cordless immersion blenders. But the good old trusted corded one is survived the test of time. So we're going to ladle all of our broth and our veggies into our Vitamix. And then I'm going to use my soup setting when I blend it up, which starts lower and then increases it in speed. Here we go. Now, if you like a little bit of chunk in your soup, just leave a couple of your residual vegetables in the bottom of your pan. That way you'll have a little bit of texture. But I prefer, when I'm making butternut squash, I prefer to use it all up. There are some soups that I like a little bit of chunk in it, but for this soup, I like it all blended. So let me get those last little bits. And then we're going to put it on here. We'll put our lid on. Seal this guy up. And then let me just, before we blend it, I'm just going to get a whisk over here to see how my chocolate is going. We'll use my little penguin one. Okay, it's starting to melt right there. Perfect. I just need it to get a good drizzle on it. And then we're going to check our grilled cheeses. Just about, I'm going to rotate on here. We'll rotate. There we go. Okay, let's get this guy blended up. So I'm going to do on here, I've got a soup setting, which is nice. It starts low, and then it will blend it up nice and high. And I find the Vitamix gives you that smooth, really smooth bisque texture. There we go. It doesn't take long to get you to it, which is also really nice. An immersion blender takes a lot more blending. But as you can see, we've got our nice, thick, velvety broth here. We're going to pour it back into our pot. But just look, it's got this nice kind of, it's not super thick. I don't like it to be like a bisque, like a, not a bisque, but like a really thick one. But it has, as you can see, it's got a nice velvety texture to it. There we go. Let's taste it. See if we have it all where we want it. Perfect. Okay, let's give our chocolate is almost ready. Give it a good stir. Once that water starts boiling underneath there, it starts to melt pretty fast. Let a little bit of steam. Let me turn that down because we don't want it to overflow too much. I'm going to slide all of this out of the way because we'll be ready for our sandwiches here in just a second. And we'll be ready to serve up our lunch after we drizzle our scones with it. You want to wait for the chocolate drizzle. You want your scones to cool off just a little bit because if you put it on right when they come out of the oven, that chocolate will melt more and you want it to kind of have a nice base and sit first. Beautiful. Just a little bit longer on that one. And here we go. See, that chocolate just takes a little bit. I don't add any butter or anything to it because I want my chocolate when it finally like firms up to remain hard. If you add a little bit of butter, then when it finally like firms, it will be a soft one. There we go. We're pretty much almost at a drizzle. I'm going to turn off this water right there. And then we'll drizzle these guys over our scones. Okay. Beautiful. So now that our chocolate is melted, we're going to drizzle this just over our scones. Just give a good little shake here for it. And these scones, again, are filled with dried cherries, walnuts, chocolate chips, and we made with sourdough discard in there. So it's just a really great kind of fall, wintry scone. Now, if you want to be super bougie, you could melt a bit more chocolate and then dip just the tip of the triangle in the scone to give you more of a bougie, you know, like macaroons are dipped. But I find this works well. And beautiful. So just about all drizzled up. And this is, again, once it cools off, this chocolate will firm up and add just a nice little extra pop of chocolate to it. Okay, let me check my grilled cheeses here. Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's turn these guys off and we're going to get ready to plate up our lunch. I'm going to just bring my scones over here so we have everything over here and ready. We don't need that. Let me grab a plate. I'll use my little cauldron today because soup and sandwich always calls for the little cauldron. I'll get our grilled cheese ready. And where did I put my ladle? Right here. Okay. And let me we are going to add on top of our soup a little bit of grated Parmesan and some pumpkin seeds. So I want to make sure that's all ready for us. And we'll be ready to serve up here. Okay. For lunch today, we have our sourdough melt with hard salami, havarti cheese, red onions, and sun-dried tomato pesto. And we will be serving that with our delicious, creamy, velvety carrot, ginger, butternut squash soup, where we kept the spices really simple with just garlic and ginger and a little bit of paprika. We're going to top our soup with some pumpkin seeds to add a little bit of a crunch, and then some freshly grated Parmesan cheese, which just melts into the soup and adds great flavor. And it pairs really well with the coconut milk that we used in it. And then, of course, we will serve it up with a delicious chocolate cherry walnut scone that we drizzled with a little bit of chocolate on top. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do a live cooking show every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes, you can always go to our page, search for what we made, and watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my cutting boards, my Vitamix, my pots and pans, all the different things that I use in my kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.